This is a tutorial for the mitered square blanket, and this was made popular by Kemper Ray. It is a free pattern on Ravelry. However, hers is not the only pattern available. They are all very, very similar. When I made mine, I did not use any specific pattern. I pretty much looked at several and then went on my own. Now, in order to make this, you can use any weight yarn. I used fingering to sock weight yarn, and I am using US 5 needles. Now, I didn't want to have the cumbersomeness of full-sized needles, so these are actually double-pointed needles that I have just put a point protector on the end, or a needle holder on the end. So if you were to knit this with DK or worsted weight yarn, you would need the same supplies, but you would just need to go up to a larger size needle. If you're using a worsted weight yarn, I would recommend somewhere between a 7 and an 8 US. DK weight, probably around a 6 to a 7, depending on your tension and how thick you want, or how tightly you want your stitches knit together. Now, this particular type of blanket, you are adding your squares as you go, so you don't knit a bunch of individual squares and then seam them together. They actually are added as you knit. So you always want to begin to the left hand side of the blanket that you're making and work your way to the right hand side. So let's get started, and I'll show you how to begin with your first square. Your squares can be any size you choose, but they do need to be composed of an odd number of stitches in order to do the decrease. So in my case, for my size squares, which are roughly 3 inches by 3 inches, I am casting on 35 stitches. I'm just using the basic cast on. Which is, I knit and bring that stitch over. So now I have 2. Three. 4. Now we have the 35 stitches on our needle. And you may be asking yourself, how is this going to form a square? We are actually going to be almost zipping this line of stitches up, and that creates the miter section. So because we have an odd number, we have 35. There are 17 stitches on each side, with an 18th stitch being the middle or center stitch. That center stitch becomes the zip line. So let me show you what's going to happen. You're going to be forming decreases on either side of the center stitch. So let me show you what one looks like when it's completed. Here we have a completed mitered square. The stitches that we cast on are actually here and here. There are 17 stitches here and 17 stitches here. The 18th stitch falls right where the corner is. So as we do the decreases on each side of the center all the way up, it zips this straight line and keeps narrowing it and pulling it in until it joins on the other end up here. So now let's get started on how to do this. We are going to knit 16 stitches across. So we'll knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 14, 15, and 16. Now, as I said, the 18th stitch, this stitch right here, is our center stitch. We are going to be doing the decreases to each stitch on either side of that center stitch. We are going to slip the next stitch, and then knit the third stitch. This is the stitch to the left of the center. Going to knit that one, and then the 2 stitches that we slipped, we're going to pick up and pass them over top of the knitted stitch, right like that. We now have decreased 2 stitches, 1 stitch on either side of the center stitch. This is now the center stitch. So then we are going to knit the remaining 16 stitches. We've now completed row 1 on the right side. The right side is the side that will be facing out of your blanket. It is the side where the pattern shows up. So now we're going to work the wrong side. So we just turn our work. And this one is you're going to knit the 16 stitches. I like to think of the wrong side as setting the pattern in place, because you've set the pattern on the right side and then you secure it on the wrong side. So we're going to knit those 16 stitches. We have those 16 stitches knit. Here is the center stitch right here. And this one we're going to purl. So we're going to move our yarn forward, purl this stitch, and then move it to the back and knit the rest of the stitches, which should be 16. We now have completed the wrong side, so we're going to turn around and work on the next set of decreases. We're going to do the exact same thing we did before, but this time instead of 16 stitches before the decrease, it will now be 15 stitches. All right, I have 15 stitches here. Here are the 3 center stitches. This is the center stitch. If you look at it closely, you can see that there was a decrease done. So we're going to slip this stitch here and this stitch here and knit this one and then pass these 2 over this stitch. So let's do that together. I'm going to slip, slip, knit this stitch, grab these 2 stitches, pass them over that stitch. We've now decreased 2 more stitches, 1 on each side of the center stitch. This is now the center stitch. And if we get close, you can see the decrease forming. We're now going to knit the remaining 15 stitches. We now have those 15 stitches knit. We're getting ready to turn and work on the wrong side, but you can see this little bump forming right here. This is the corner of the square that is forming, and here are the decreases right along the top, right along here. So when I turn this, I'm going to knit 15 stitches. When I get to this center stitch, I'm going to purl it and then knit the other 15. I'm going to continue this same pattern until I have only 3 stitches left on my needles. I'm pausing partway through so you can see how the square is shaping up. as you can see, the decrease rows along here. I call them the zip line because they remind me of a zipper, because you were taking something that was straight and zipping it up, and it's pulling it closed up to the top. I have a center stitch here, and I have 8 stitches on each side of the square. So I'm just about halfway done. The last few rows, because you're decreasing, will go fast, and when I get close to the top, I will show you what to do to end that square. I now am down to just the last couple of rows. I have 3 stitches on each side of the center stitch. So we're going to do this portion together. I am on the wrong side here. So I am knitting 3, purling 1, knitting 3. I don't know if you can hear it in the background. I have my windows open and there are birds going crazy outside. But it's beautiful out, so I enjoy hearing them. Now I'm knitting 2. I'm going to slip 1, slip the center stitch, knit the stitch next to it, pass those 2 over, knit the last 2, knit the wrong side here, so I will be doing 2 stitches, a purl stitch, and 2 knit stitches. I now have 2 stitches on each side of the center stitch, so I will knit 1, slip 1, slip 2, knit, pass over those 2 stitches, knit the last stitch. There's now 3 stitches on the needles. I will do the wrong side, knit, purl, and knit. My last row, I will not be doing a wrong side to because there's only 3 stitches on the needle. So I'm going to slip the first stitch and the second stitch. I will knit the 3rd stitch, pass these 2 over, and I have just 1 stitch left. What I do, I clip my thread, I just pull this loop up a little bit, I give it a little twist, like that, and I put the rest of the yarn through it and pull it snug. Now here is my first square. Now remember, we started here, and as we knit up this way, it drew the square in, and this is where we finished. So if you remember at the beginning of the video, I said you always will be knitting from the left to the right. So this will be the square on the far left of your blanket as you're looking at it on the right side. we're going to be attaching our next square to this side. Now what we're going to do in order to do that is we are going to pick up 18 stitches along the edge here, with the 18th stitch being right directly in the corner here. Now, you can pick up these stitches in a couple of ways. I do it right on my knitting needles. You could use a crochet hook. I just simply use my knitting needle and I poke into one of the holes. I grab the yarn for the next square, and I use it pretty much like a crochet hook, and I pull it up and slide it onto my needle. You are doing this with the right side facing you. I'm going to pull this up close so you can see a little bit better what I'm doing. As I said, you could use a crochet hook for this, but I just tend to use a knitting needle. I use two at a time. I go in, if you go in one stitch for each of the rows, there are 17 rows, so that would give you your 17 stitches, and then you have your 18th right in the corner. So my next stitch would be right here, and I grab it and slide it onto the left needle. So I now have 3. I now have 17 stitches going across the needle here, and I'm going to put the 18th stitch directly into the corner. This is your center stitch. So now I have my 18th stitch, but I need to add 17 more. So because this is along the edge sitting like this of my blanket, and the blanket's going to go this direction, I'm going to actually, there's nothing to attach to down here, I'm going to cast on 17 more stitches. So I'm going to cast on just how we began, with 1, 2, 3. I now am back to my 35 stitches again. I have the 17 plus 1 center stitch on the square itself, and then I have cast on here an additional 17. From here out, it is the same as how I knit this square. I'm going to knit the 16 stitches and do the decreases over the next 3 center stitches, and then continue with knitting the next 16. So you're going to repeat this same process all over again. And you're going to continue to do this for the width of how wide you want your blanket to be. The blanket that I have is 11 squares across for a total of 33 inches wide. So I repeated this particular pattern and block 11 times until I finished. Now you might ask, now what do we do for the next row after we've completed it? Because you are knitting from the bottom of the blanket up. You're not knitting this direction, you're knitting this way. So this is the bottom left-hand corner of my blanket. So when I get ready to do the next row, which would be row 2, instead of starting by picking up stitches here, I'm going to start by casting on my 17 stitches. The 18th stitch actually will start here, and then I will pick up my 17 stitches. And it'll be the same process as this all over again. It'll just change where my cast on is because I'm starting on an edge. Now you might say, what happens once I have enough blocks around that I am picking up stitches on both sides? And yes, that's exactly what's going to happen. Let me show you on the blanket. This is the row I am currently working on. This is the block I'm going to be filling in. So I'm going to be picking up 17 stitches here. My 18th stitch will fall right into the corner. And then I will pick up 17 stitches across here and repeat the same pattern. And then that will fill in that square. So here are a few rows of my blanket that I chose to show you that are a little bit darker so they would show up. You can see that here's my stitch going across where I picked up 17 stitches, the 18th being at this edge, and then I picked up 17 stitches going across, knit this square, and then by the time I came to the second one and I'm on the second row, I was able to pick up 17 stitches here with the 18th being in the corner, and then 17 stitches across, and then knit my square, and from there all the way across. The only time that you end up having to pick up stitches after you finish that first row is when you do the edging here. That's the only time after the first row. So the first row, like I said, you're going to be picking up your stitches along the bottom edge. But once you get to your second row, you will be picking them up just on the side of the beginning block. So I hope you found this helpful, and this is a great project to use up scrap yarns. It's a lot of fun because each square takes roughly a half an hour to 40 minutes to complete. So it's something that's fast if you want to feel like you've gotten something accomplished. But it's a lot of fun, and it's fun to look back at the different yarns that are in the project and remember where they came from or special projects that you made with them. So if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up and please subscribe. Click that little red button if you haven't already. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you again on Saturday.